سلام. من از این فرصتی که به من داده شده که در ایران امروز با شما راجع به یه موضوعی که بهش خیلی علاقه دارم صحبت کنم خیلی خوشحالم و چون فارسیم به اندازه به من اجازه نمیده که با راحتی بتونم راجع به این مورد صحبت کنم، با اجازه شما من به انگلیسی صحبت خواهم کرد. این چند تا حرفم که الان زدم ترمیم کردم. خیلی ممنون. Let's start. 3 years ago, I was at a crossroads. I wanted to bridge two domains, two areas that I have always been passionate about. International relations and politics on the one hand, and business and commerce on the other. And so I thought about what was the best way to reconcile both. There are obviously many options. One sensible choice, which some of you might suggest, especially given where we are today, could be oil. Oil as bringing together business and international politics and affairs. But oil as an industry is only 100 years old, as we saw earlier today, and there is no indication that it will be with us in 100 years. I ended up going for something more fundamental that's always been a common denominator. Nutrients, cereals, wheat, barley, rice, corn, soybeans. We have always and will always need to eat, and nutrients are an essential source of energy for human beings. What I want to achieve in the next minutes is to show you how nutrients are storytellers of civilization, how they embody one of the most critical challenges of this century, and finally, how nutrients, or in fact agriculture, is the new holy grail for innovators. So let us start with nutrients and civilization. It's no surprise that the people who introduced and taught agriculture in our world are remembered as heroes or legends until today. This man, Emperor Shennong, 5,000 years ago in China, is believed to have introduced plowing and agriculture to his countrymen. He is remembered today as the god of the 5 cereals, which were held as sacred. Closer to Iran, the Near East, the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent is known as the cradle of civilization. And it was precisely agriculture that enabled civilization to develop and blossom in this region. 2 great rivers, favorable weather, irrigation techniques enabled tribal groups, nomadic tribes to form the first farming settlements and develop agrarian societies. The rest is history. You see, our world has evolved a lot in the past 200 years, becoming increasingly global. And looking at this story of globalization through nutrients contains fascinating insights. So let's quickly revisit globalization through nutrients. This map shows you, roughly speaking, the trade flows, the seaborne trade flows of grains in 1880. Behind this map, behind these arrows, are fascinating insights. You can see that most of the grain surpluses of the time were heading towards England. Why was that? Well, England was the first country to industrialize, with hundreds of thousands leaving their farms to go and work in manufacturing jobs. And this triggered for the demand in grains to produce bread to feed these people. This period of time is also very interesting. 1880, that time captured the rise of the modern grain trade. For the first time, an international market connecting remotely producers with consumers of food throughout the world through new high-speed communication information technologies. And at last, it was around food that the first futures markets developed. Fast forwarding 130 years, and this is a picture of Liverpool of the time. Fast forwarding 130 years, we see a very different picture of international trade flows. This tells us another important unfolding story. The story of the East rising, the story of China and other countries in a matter of decades going through a second industrial revolution, bigger in scale, in faster time than ever previously. This has had profound consequences on staple markets, increasing the demand for proteins and other products that are essential to human beings to be fed. And as incomes have been rising in China, higher incomes have triggered higher demand for protein products, meats, poultry, pork. And these products have a knock-on effect. This demand has a knock-on effect on feed grains because, take you an example, in a feedlot environment, to produce 1 kilo of grain, you need, to produce 1 kilo of meat, you need 8 kilograms of grains. So you can see that nutrients offer us a perfect way to see globalization. We saw earlier that in 1880 it was England that was industrializing. At the time, the farmer in 1880 who was located in Australia, he was concerned with the price paid for wheat in Liverpool. And with China rising in the space of a few decades and modernizing, today producers of soybeans in Argentina crunch constantly for information about Chinese soybean demand and see what import will take place. The agriculture industry has evolved in the past decades to become a complex one, binding many different industries, people, and skill sets together. In fact, if you want to analyze a country and gather insights, agriculture is a very good proxy because it brings virtually so many things together. You have to ask yourself questions such as weather conditions, what percentage of the population is involved in agriculture? What are the policies like? Does the government subsidize farming? Does it control price? Where is the demand coming from? Is it from the food sector, the feed sector, the energy sector? What type of infrastructure are they for export? Is the country connected to the sea? Is there an inland transportation system? And finally, what are the consumer preferences like? This is what I find very interesting working in this sector, because it enables me and everyone to see and gather a lot of insights. This is for the past, and now I want to turn to the future and discuss agriculture and nutrients as capturing one of the most important challenges that we're facing, namely the growth of the global population that is set to reach 9 billion in 2050. This is already a very challenging situation. To add to the challenge, an important part of this increase is going to happen around cities, urbanization. For the first time several years ago, more people in the world live in cities than outside. This is going to create massive pressure on food markets. And if this wasn't enough, we live in a world that's becoming richer, a growing middle class in countries from Brazil, India, China, Russia, that's going to consume more protein-rich food. Essentially, this is a major challenge, and to answer it, we're going to have to produce more. This is not the only solution, but it starts with a higher production. Together with other solutions, we're going to have to produce more, store more, transform more, but we have to first produce more. And we can break down the problem of higher production into, we can break it down in two parts. Countries which have modern agriculture infrastructure, which have already been through technological disruptions in the past decades, have been able to consistently increase their agricultural production yield. They need to continue to do it, but in a sustainable fashion, without damaging the soil, without damaging water supplies, without damaging communities. That is one part of the challenge. The second part of the challenge concerns countries which have fertile ground for production, but which haven't seen this increase in yield. Ultimately, production needs to grow in these areas, and we need to see a convergence. That's what needs to happen if we want to feed 9 billion people in 2050. And the solutions that are going to need to be implemented are very varied. I want to tell you about one area which I find very exciting and which I am involved in, which revolves around the information economy, which I think is going to have a huge impact on agriculture, because agriculture, traditionally speaking, has been underserved by software and information technologies. So I want to tell you a little bit about what I find interesting in this area. Namely, in the challenge I discussed with you before, we saw that in countries which have not seen increasing yields are going to need to increase the production. Mobile phone penetration in developing countries is massive. There are more mobile phones today in the African continent than in Europe. And these mobile phones today are being used to help farmers. One of the key questions that farmers, or key challenges that farmers face in these countries, pertains to information. What prices are their products going to trade for? Should they go to a market that's 10 kilometers east or 20 kilometers west? What prices will they find in these different markets? Today, they are not informed. And mobile phones are changing this. We see more and more, and these are some companies which are changing the reality, which are enabling farmers to get better access to information on market prices, aggregating farmers together around groups, to buy inputs, to sell their outputs together, essentially building cooperatives from the ground up and enabling farmers to share knowledge. Farmers in an area face one type of issue. If they solve it, the solution applies to many others. And mobile phones are increasingly being used for that purpose. And I think that is part of the solution, and it's going to enable us to increase production in those countries. In more sophisticated markets, think of the challenge in the following way. A farm is an environment that is rich in data. A farm contains data on many things. It contains data on soil. It contains data on production, on weather, on livestock, on operations, on expenses. This data has value if it can be collected, if it can be syndicated, and delivered in a way that makes sense to the actual decision maker. And to be able to enable a sustainable growth in developed farming countries, we are seeing applications that are delivering real-time analytical capabilities to farmers. In essence, a free flow of information between the farmers, the equipment through sensors and databases. And all this is going to enable us to allocate resources efficiently. We saw before that agriculture is the major consumer of our water resources. If we're able to measure what precise area of a field has low moisture, and we are able to answer that in precision, this is going to benefit a producing country in drought circumstances. So I see agriculture as becoming increasingly data-driven, and software and cloud computing, which have already disrupted various industries, are entering agriculture. And this is going to have a huge impact. I've told you about agriculture as a storyteller of civilization. I've told you about agriculture as symbolizing a key challenge that we face in the future, and as a field for innovators to find solutions in. It's not the first time that we face a major challenge to increase production. In fact, towards the end of the 1960s, a book called The Population Bomb warned us that hundreds of millions of people were going to die because we were not going to be able to feed them. Ultimately, this prediction was proven wrong because technology innovation around seeds, fertilizers, and agriculture management techniques enabled us to drastically increase the production. The current challenge will be solved in part by this information economy, and I'm not here to offer you a precise solution, but rather to invite you as innovators to take a look at agriculture and at this precise challenge. The stakes are immense, and so are the opportunities. Thank you very much. Khayli Ma'amna.